Number 8.
Whilst the idea of a mission to Mars is exciting in a big, abstract way, it's a bit distant. The moon is a big part of our lives, whether you notice or not. It hangs above our heads every night and has been a potent symbol in our culture since the invention of culture itself, not to mention the fact that it represents one of the greatest achievements of mankind. In times of economic difficulty such as we've seen in recent years, it is so easy for a society to slip into the habit of becoming inherently inward-looking and pessimistic. We are losing the ability to look up and to wonder, which is very bad news for science. If you want public support for something, you need to get people emotionally engaged. Humanity's connection with the moon and stars is still strong, but waning. No pun intended, and what better way to bring it back home to everyone than by getting people to confront our place in the solar system, both as it is now, and as we would like it to be.
Number 7.
We've spent a grand total of about 80 hours with actually human boot on the lunar ground. The above image of the Apollo 17 landing site shows the teeny area that we managed to cover during the 22 hours spent on the surface. Unmanned probes and orbiting satellites have managed to gather more data on our nearest neighbor since we last left and, far from telling us all we need to know from afar, it has revealed tantalizing evidence of a much more complex lunar environment. There is even some to suggest that it could harbor hidden water reserves. Due to the fact that the moon is not geologically active, it could also offer us a unique insight into the history of the Earth and the wider solar system. The Earth's volcanoes, oceans and atmosphere all steadily erode away the evidence of impacts and changes throughout its life, but the moon remains a perfectly preserved record. There's a lot more to that grey little space rock that meets the eye, and we've barely scratched the surface.
Number 6.
Some of the most vocal arguments against returning to the moon center around the "what has the moon ever done for us?" argument. Why would we spend time, money and resources landing on a sterile lump of rock for no return? The reality is that a happy side effect of pushing back the frontiers is that you get a hell of a lot of innovation going on. This isn't just the preserve of astronauts either, as the new technologies and discoveries trickle down through society. NASA estimates that they have pioneered as many as 6,300 new technologies in their missions to the stars, many of which we now take for granted. Without the Apollo missions, you wouldn't have things like your lovely memory foam mattress and your Brita water filter. Beyond the day-to-day accoutrements, the Apollo missions gave us the life-saving technology for CAT scanners, which we now use to detect cancers, and the microchips we use to run our society. We can't know for sure what another moon mission would do for us, but one thing's for sure, you can't go to the moon without some hello innovation.
Number 5.
There's a lot of talk, these days, of sending humans to Mars. However, we haven't sent a manned mission to another celestial body for more than 40 years. Talk about running before you can walk. A mission to the moon would be an excellent refresher course in how to explore the solar system, allowing us to work out the kinks in our spacefaring technology and establish a solid base, physically, intellectually and technologically, from which to work. If we set off to Mars, guns blazing and rockets struggling, we run the risk of rocking up, sticking a flag in and calling it a day, much like the Apollo programs. Sure, it would be something to be proud of, but a few space rocks with flags on them doth not a space colony make. In order to get anywhere close to establishing a constant off-world human presence, we need to look at our closest neighbor first.
Number 4.
As well as being a good practice run for lengthier future missions, a moon base would make an excellent pit stop on the way to anywhere else in the solar system. Proportionally speaking, the moon is barely out of the clouds, but it does have one big advantage over Earth: its size. Hauling a dirty great spaceship off-world is a tough business. The Earth's gravity makes our escape velocity, That's how fast you need to be traveling to leave the planet, somewhere in the region of 11.2 kilometers per second. This takes a lot of fuel and, annoyingly, the more fuel you have on board, the more you need as the ship gets heavier. On the other hand, the moon's lower mass and resultant lower gravity brings the escape velocity down to 2.38 kilometers per second. Fuel either stored on a moon base in advance, or derived from the material in the moon's surface itself, would make it an ideal pit stop, as we would only need to launch our rockets from Earth with enough fuel to get them to the lunar surface, knowing that we can refuel there and use far less on the second launch. We could also store supplies for longer missions up there in advance, taking a huge amount of pressure off size and weight restrictions for our craft.
Number 3.
Missions to Mars, Venus or anywhere else in our solar system are going to be difficult, lengthy processes. They're also going to be incredibly dangerous for the people involved, and giving our astronauts the best training we can before catapulting them into the black void of space is probably a good idea. Training for life on an alien world is currently undertaken on Earth in our best approximations of extraterrestrial conditions, but it's difficult to mirror exactly what life would be like in an off-world base. A mission to Mars is likely to take a minimum of 18 months, and we have no real idea as to how that would affect a human being. Flight time to the Red Planet could be anywhere between 6 months to a year, so ironing out any problems in a training environment would be essential. The Moon would be a much better analog for a Martian environment than somewhere like the Mojave Desert, and much closer to home than Mars. Testing our engineering and our astronauts in this environment before taking the plunge would massively increase the chances of success. Who knows, maybe one day young hopefuls could be attending the Moon Academy.
Number 2.
Because Jesus H. Christ, that stuff is tedious. Okay, granted, it's probably not worth throwing billions of dollars at a mission just to prove a couple of nutters on the internet wrong, but given all of the other advantages to going back to the moon, it would be a nice little side effect. Denying that the moon landings happened might just seem like a hilarious pastime for the stupid, the gullible and the paranoid, but it is symptomatic of a much bigger distrust people seem to have for science. Not that it's a bad thing to be skeptical and open-minded, that's a good basis for most scientific inquiry, but in the words of Tim Minchin, if you open your mind too much, your brain falls out. Plus, you have to admit, the look on your weird conspiracy theorist cousin's face when the footage for the landing site flyby is released would be priceless. Sadly, however, this might be a little hopeful. Conspiracy theorists, by their very nature, use cherry-picking, confirmation bias and willful ignorance to uphold their worldviews, and there's nothing to say they wouldn't do it again, even if we did go back.
Number 1.
So many of the scientists we have today will say that the moon landings played a major role in their love for the subject and their desire to pursue it as a career. If there's something that you can never have too much of, it's a healthy thirst for knowledge. Raising our kids in a society that looks inwards, divides itself and says can't more than can is always a bad idea. Raising our kids in a society in which prizes innovation and exploration can only be good. We, as adults, can get as excited as we like about the prospect of heading to the moon or Mars or whatever, but, ultimately, it's the next generation that are hopefully going to see our species head further out towards the stars than we ever could. Just as the last moon landings inspired this generation of scientists, going back could just capture the imagination of an Einstein in the making.